together with is building on what has already been done. So your challenge is to find in the business literature, because this is in the field of business, some concept that is similar to or means the same thing as a symbiotic relationship in the field of biology or in the field of psychology. That is what you would need to do. And in the field of business, they may not use the term, use it as symbiotic relationship, but we're talking about a relationship that is mutually beneficial to the employee, the customer, and the customers. Am I right? That's right. When I read your work. Right. That is what I'm seeing. And good common sense does suggest that a business that would like to be profitable and enduring should think in terms of developing this so-called symbiotic relationship. So the question is, to what extent have successful businesses been aware of this and have used this model in their relationship, albeit they may not have used the term? Does that make sense to you?
Right, yes. Mm-hmm. So what other term? Now I have to find another term that's close or equal to.
Okay, Marina's just texted you something here. She's talking about win-win strategies in business.
Okay.
Win-win strategies.
Yeah, it's been a real challenge finding so now that I know I can look outside of, because I've been looking for exact
terminology. Yes, I understand that.
And now that I can, so now I won't look for the exact, because I haven't been able to find it. I'm the only one right now.
Yeah, so you look for terminology that mean the same thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, I could do it. I think that makes more sense.
That is helpful, because you may say you have a section on symbiotic relationships in your literature review, and say you even have some content there from biology, as Dr. Henry just mentioned, because that's going to help the reader understand the term, right? The concept.
Right.
Then you're going to begin to apply that to the business relationship. I was just looking at it, this book is by Peter Drucker, The 5 Most Important Questions That Any Organization Should Ask. And, it's a standard that's been around. We base some of our own concepts at BGU on this particular book. One of the questions that Drucker has asked is, what does the customer value? That's a key question from Drucker's point of view in terms of what a company needs to be asking of its customers. What do they value? Now you've talked about that a little bit within your proposal. But you could go to Drucker and say, okay, what is he talking about when a company needs to be asking, what does our customer value? That might give you some insights in terms of applying the term values to the symbiotic relationship.
You say it's Drucker?
Drucker, Drucker, first name Peter. He's got a book, it's called The 5 Most Important Questions You Will Ever Ask About Your Organization.
Okay.
You could start with that book. He goes over, the issues like, what's our mission? What's our values? What do our customers value? What are the results? And what's our plan? So, he goes over, and of course, we were just looking at this last week in one of our BGU meetings. Whenever we even design a curriculum, we ask those 5 questions. Our board of directors asks those 5 questions before we start any new program. So, and they use that as kind of a criterion in order to determine if they think a program is worthwhile.
Okay.
So yeah, but it hooks in with the values pretty strongly. All right, with that, we probably need to go ahead and move forward because we need to get through some material today on research methodology. So it looks like everybody's with us. Good evening, Maureen. Good evening, Noel.
Good evening, Dr. Payne. Good evening, Dr. Henry.
Good
Good evening,
evening.
Noel.
Good to have you all with us
When I
today.
came to the class, Ryan was before me.
Right. Well, what we're going to be doing in this session is looking at the research methodology a little bit. Dr. Henry is going to lead us through a PowerPoint presentation that will help us distinguish between, two standard methodologies, qualitative and quantitative. And of course, you could have a mixture of those two, which we call them mixed methods. I want to make just one comment that Dr. Henry and I have been talking about the last couple of weeks that I think is important, because what I think we're seeing right now, BGU has had a strong emphasis on transformation. Okay, it's part of our value system. Okay, every dissertation must culminate in some kind of a transformational process, a transformational strategy that begins to initiate some transformational change in a particular setting, whether it's a community or an organization, whatever it might be. And that's good. I think, like I say, that's a strong part of our value system. And I've been a part of the school since 1990 when we started the school. Okay. But what has struck me, I think, as I've been working with Dr. Henry on this course this time around, is that we need to make sure that the transformational process, that strategy, actually emerges out of solid research. Too often, organizations can kind of just jump into some kind of a plan to start making changes or revisions or improvements, but they've not actually done their homework, their research, so to speak, that actually led to a solid transformational strategy. So I think that's I think something that we need to be keeping in mind. Even though, in this course, I've always asked people to, put down your transformational strategy in the proposal. I think I'm going to start changing that now and say, okay, you may have some ideas, but try to put those on hold for a time and really focus on the problem and the research questions and the research you're going to do to try to address that problem, answer whatever your research questions happen to be. And once you've gone through that process, then begin to think about a transformational process that actually is related to the research you've just come through. So I'm just putting that out, I guess, as a qualifier. It's something I'm starting to think more strongly about and focus on. And Dr. Henry has kind of helped me see that even a little more clearly. And I'm really appreciative of her insights onto that issue. And so I'm just passing that on to you as we start this Zoom room on research methodology. Okay.
Dr. Payne, did you plan to record? I don't think
let's see. It is on record. Yeah, we are recording.
Oh, it's on record? Okay.
Yes, we're good.
Okay, I guess I wouldn't see it on my side. Okay.
Maybe,
yes, it is. I see it's recording. Sorry.
Yeah, I see a little button
okay,
top left on my screen. Okay. Well, with that, let's go ahead and start. Dr. Henry, if you're ready to find that PowerPoint, we'll start thinking through that.
You didn't put it into the course, did you? I will look for the one because I have more than one. I will share my screen and find it. I'll find the one you sent me. So I sent you. So I showed the same thing.
Oh, yeah.
I'll find it. I have it. Okay.
There it is. Yeah.
This one, qualitative.
Yeah, that was the one we were looking at. Yeah, and it's a PDF, as remember.
Yes.
Yep.
Oh, it's a PDF. Yeah.
And that's fine. Yeah, I think we looked at it and it looked really good.
Okay, let's see. I know I have another one, but I think this is the one that I sent you. Yes, quantitative and qualitative research. The quantitative research is defined as a type of educational research in which the researcher decides what to study. The qualitative research is defined as a type of educational research in which the researcher relies on the views of the participants in order to come up with the strategy or the issues that need to be addressed. What are the characteristics of each? The quantitative research is defined by specific narrow questions, and that the questioning process of research, especially under the quantitative study, is very important. We say it's important that you ask the right questions. Then you collect data from the participants, you analyze numbers using statistics, and you conduct the inquiry in an unbiased, objective manner. Objectivity is very important in quantitative research. Qualitative research, we ask broad, general questions. Collecting data consists largely of words, that is text, or image, pictures, etc. You collect data from a number of sources. Then you describe and analyze words for themes. For example, if you do an interview, and interviews is one method using qualitative research data collection, then the way in which you compile the report and the interview is you want to identify common themes that the respondents presented. So you conduct the inquiry in a subjective and biased manner when you do qualitative research. The differences between the two in each step: identifying a research problem. In the quantitative study, you want to look at trends, or you want to look at explanation of variables in relationships. In the qualitative research, what you're doing is an exploration in which little is known about the problem, because you want to come to a detailed understanding of a central phenomenon, so that there is an aspect of subjectivity that is inherent in the qualitative research that is absent in the quantitative research. The focus is on objectivity in the quantitative research. Reviewing the literature. The review of literature is central to research, whether it's qualitative or quantitative. It's a major role suggesting the research questions. As we've been saying over and over in this course, one of the things we've been asking you to do as you've thought about and processed your research interests, sorry, is having defined your questions, we ask you to look at the literature to see to what extent these questions have been answered in the literature. Sometimes I say to students, when you read the literature review, see what questions were asked, were addressed in the study of interest that you are reading, and see if those questions are questions you could use in your study. There's nothing wrong in doing that. You just have to give credit and identify that a certain researcher addressed that same question. In the qualitative research, there is a minor role in suggesting the research question to be asked, because what happens with a qualitative study is after you've collected the data, then you may propose as a step forward what kind of questions need to be addressed. The research questions are also used to justify the importance of studying the research problem. In both quantitative and qualitative studies, the research question justifies the importance of studying the research problem. Let me stop here for any questions, or have you think in terms of your own study and see how, you know, which focus you seem to think you need to be going in for your study. Questions, comments before I move on?
I always thought that a quantitative approach was one for a more scientific kind of study. Am I wrong?
No, both are considered scientific studies, scientific research. It could be quantitative or qualitative. What makes it what makes it scientific is that there are steps that you follow to come to the answer of the research questions. There are steps that you follow that, in terms of the quantitative research, especially, we talk about being able to replicate the research so that somebody else could take the same study that you have done, use a comparative sample, and if they follow all of your steps, it is anticipated that they should come up with the same results. But the qualitative study is just as scientific. But I understand where you're coming from when you say that. And if I may comment on the two in terms of the challenges, the quantitative research is a much easier research to do than qualitative research. Yes, the qualitative research is more demanding. I think sometimes what happens is people get fixated on the statistical aspect of the quantitative research and think that because of that area, for some people that may be of challenge, they think that the one is easier than the other, but they're both challenging and they both have their place in research. And as you know, you also have the mixed method research where you do both you collect data quantitatively and qualitatively. So there's that too.
Let me make a couple of comments too.
Sure.
This is Bill.
Yes, certainly.
As we're thinking about these two approaches, let me just make one comment on the types of questions that may be asked. For example, in a quantitative study, your questions are going to be what we call closed-ended. You know, true, false, multiple choice, generally speaking, you know, in terms of surveys or interviews. If you're doing an experiment, you're probably going to be asking some other, and all those will probably also be, you know, true, false questions, or, you know, you could have varying kinds of questions in an experiment. But most of our work, let's look at Marines for an example. Say you wanted to know in a particular area of Jamaica, what is the perception that women have in regards to being involved in entrepreneurial work? Okay, you could design a quantitative study, right? Just a yes, no. You know, I have thought about entering an entrepreneurial work, yes or no. Okay, and then you could kind of tabulate that to see how many people said yes, how many women, and how many said no. If you could even use a multiple choice. And this is in the negative, and then we try to stay positive. But if you said what you say multiple choice, what has blocked you from possibly moving into an entrepreneurial endeavor? You know, finances, lack of knowledge, my culture, you know, but that's multiple choice. But we're still working with a quantitative approach at this point. A qualitative approach may be you're going to interview, say, 20 women, and you're going to just start to talk about entrepreneurialism. Okay, I don't know if that's even a word, but we'll use that as a word. And you start talking, and as you're talking to that woman, you're listening for various, we just said word theme. A woman may say, well, yeah, I've thought about, you know, going into a business, but I just don't know if I can really, get the capital to make that happen. And besides, my knowledge level may not be adequate. Okay, now there's two themes that came out of that conversation: lack of capital and lack of knowledge. So, but there I'm approaching the issue from a qualitative interview, and I'm using open-ended questions. I may say, what do you think about entering into an entrepreneurial work? Have you thought about this? What's been your thinking? And you just let the woman begin to talk. And now, but you're looking for themes as she's talking. So that's just an example, I guess, in terms of how a quantitative approach might be used and a qualitative. The quantitative, say we were looking for, we talked about trends or perceptions, general perceptions of women in Jamaica. Okay, and we can maybe get somewhat of a sense of what's going on in terms of what they think about women in entrepreneurial work with a quantitative study. But then you could do a little more in-depth work by talking to women individually in an interview setting and begin to see what kind of themes come out of your conversations.
Thank you, Dr. Payne. Okay, we'll move on. Specifying the purpose for research. The quantitative research demands that you be specific and narrow. The word is focus, focus, focus. Seek measurable, observable data on variables. In comparison, the qualitative research is broad and general, as you seek to understand the participants' experiences. So you listen to their stories, you may have a focus group, you may do interviews, etc. And you take all of that data to see what is the convergence, what are the common themes, etc. When you look at when you do a qualitative type of study. Collecting data. Quantitative research, we use instruments, we call them the data collection instrument with the questions, etc. We collect information from a large number of individuals. In quantitative research, the issue of the sample size is important. Sample population, very important. In broad general terms, the population who may qualify for your research are all the people who have a certain characteristics. But it's seldom that you can really do research that covers the entire population. So in principle, you sample the population, and your sample, ideally, your sample should be a representative sample of all the possible people who could have participated in your research. Quantitative research is very focused and clear on that. Qualitative research, collecting data, uses forms with general emerging questions to permit the participant to generate responses. We gather data from words, images, etc., and we collect information from a small number of individuals or sites. So the size of the sample in the qualitative research can be quite small as compared to the size of the sample in a quantitative research, depending, of course, on the population that would qualify to do your study. And of course, in both the quantitative and the qualitative research, we do have to pay attention to context. So the context may help to define the size of the population who may qualify to participate in your research. Analyzing and interpreting data in the quantitative research, statistics is one of the basic tools of analysis. Data analysis tend to consist of statistical analysis You describe trends, you compare group differences, you relate variables. Interpretation tends to consist of comparing results with prior predictions and past research. In the qualitative research, you do text analysis, you look at description of themes, and you state the larger meaning of findings. Reporting and evaluating research. The quantitative research tend to use standard fixed structure and evaluation criteria, and it takes an objective and unbiased approach. That is the ideal. In the qualitative research, you are flexible. There could be an emergent structure and evaluative criteria according to the data that you have collected. And there is room for you to take a subjective and biased approach with a qualitative study. Comments, questions on that comparison?
Yeah, it seems like my paper is going back and forth between the two.
Okay. Tell us a little bit more about that, what you were saying.
So, like the previous slide, like one slide, I'm dealing with a narrow focus group, meaning not that many people, two companies, and then on slide number 10, you had something that was slide number 9. There was you mentioned something that I can't remember what it was. Let's see.
I've pulled it up here. Text analysis, themes, larger meaning, qualitative research.
Right. But that's But so, as I said, with smaller groups, I would be qualitative. But the data analysts and trends and statistical analysts, I would also be using that and describe trends and comparisons, and I'll be using that. And as far as how to interpret, it seems like they're going back and forth. Is it? I know you said you can use both, but
you can use a mixed method.
So should it lean towards one or the other, or can it just be completely blended?
Well, you have the option of being strictly quantitative, strictly qualitative, or have a blended approach where you collect data both quantitatively by quantitative method and qualitative method. That's what we call the mixed method approach. So you have 3 approaches that you may choose from. But the approach, the approach that you take to the study is based on the problem that you're studying and the questions you're going to address. So it's not like if you start out by saying necessarily, although I know people do that, I want to do a quantitative study. You could do that, you can. But you should also realize that in terms of your research, your research needs to be grounded on your statement of the problem and your questions of the study. And that is the source from which you decide what method best suits your study. And then, of course, the review of literature. Because as you review the literature, you may find that other people who have addressed the same problem that you're addressing may have looked more at a quantitative approach. Then you could use that in one of 2 ways. You could say, well, most of the studies of this issue have used a quantitative research, but I think that this study should take a qualitative approach. And then, of course, you would have to justify why you think that there's time for us to address the issue by doing a qualitative study. And you could use that as the basis for which to justify the qualitative approach that you would like to take. But remember, you're always grounding what you do on what other people have done. You're not reinventing the wheel, and yes, there is room for some uniqueness in your study, but you're not just out there floating in midair. You're grounding in your work in what others have done. Research builds on the work of other researchers. Does that make sense to you? Okay.
Let me make one other comment.
Okay,
in regards to what you were talking
sure.
about, Brian. I could foresee, say you were going to look at, say you're going to look at two companies. Maybe you would want to understand what is the perception of the employees of that company in terms of how they consider the values of those people that they work with. You could design what we call a Likert scale, okay? You could ask an employee, on a scale of 1 to 10, how important are the customer's values to you? And they would list 1 to 10, and you got to get an idea of how much particular the employees of a company actually think about the values of their customers. If you wanted to just see how many employees actually have any thought of of the term symbiotic relationship in terms of business, you might even put that out there. Have you ever thought about the term symbiotic relationship in regards to the way you relate to your customers? You probably get mainly no, I don't know, but that would give you a baseline to determine, okay, this is what the thinking is of these employees. Now, that's the quantitative side. You may want to then go into more in depth. You may decide you're going to talk to a few employees, you may talk to a few managers, and you're going to sit down and have a conversation, and you're going to think of some questions. Say if you're dealing with a symbiotic relationship, you may just ask, say, a management person, can you tell me anything about what a symbiotic relationship might look like between us as a company and a customer? And then they would just start to talk. Now you're working from a qualitative research point of view, where you're sitting down and you're allowing that manager to talk to you. And you're going to listen intently to see what kinds of thoughts, concepts, themes come forth. So now those are two different examples of how you might use a quantitative approach to understand some of the trends, the thinking of a big population of employees, say, of a company, and then the qualitative approach, where you may sit down with a few leaders and go in a little more in depth in terms of the symbiotic relationship.
What are the research designs associated with quantitative and qualitative research?
Seems like I'm not making contact.
I'm hearing you.
Are you hearing me?
Yes, I'm hearing you.
Okay.
Now, are you able to see and to hear?
Yes, I can see and I can hear you.
Okay, good.
I wanted to make a contribution to the...
Certainly, go ahead. Go ahead.
As I think about my own research, I am seeing it as more of a qualitative aspect. But in my own head, I was saying that I needed to have a little slant of quantitative in terms of asking some of the very close questions to young people in terms of what they think about early pregnancy, what they think about some of the challenges, and maybe to ask some older persons also questions, how they feel when they happy or sad or what have you, when they learn about their daughter becoming pregnant at 13. What is the reaction? So I'm thinking that I may very well want to set up some area where I can get some of those answers. I don't know how you feel about that.
There again, I'll just say, my thought on that again, Noel, would be, again, what's your purpose? If your purpose, say, is to understand the what is the common thinking about, say, teen pregnancy, early teen pregnancy, among a particular population, then you would have to, come up with a representative sample, and that you'd say put out a survey and try, and so that's the quantitative. There again, though, you may then be talking to some parents, or you may be talking to some students or teenagers, and you're going a little more in depth with some open-ended questions. So yeah, there again, you may have a mixed method. If the quantitative is to understand a little bit in terms of what is the common thinking of a particular part of the population, that's what the quantitative is going to help you understand. The qualitative, though, will help you, dig in a little deeper with a few people, just to understand a little more about their motivation and whatever.
Yes, I agree with what Dr. Payne has just said to Noel. I was also thinking, again, I think for Noel, the issue is the focus, because there's so many dimensions to our understanding of the challenge of teenage pregnancy. And it is not, from one perspective, we may say that it's not impossible, but from the other perspective, we know you would like to graduate. So if you want to graduate, you can't do all these perspectives. You have to focus in on one perspective and do your study. Now, it may be that, and I know you've talked a lot about the culture that seems to undergird the practice of, well, not the practice so much, practice and acceptance are two different things. I think what I've heard you say throughout the course, you're concerned about the culture that supports, and that there's a culture that supports and encourages teenage pregnancy. Now, if you were to use that as a focus of your study, I could see that being a qualitative study. I could also see it being a mixed method study. For example, when trying to understand culture is a delicate issue, but there are different ways to study it to make sure that what you come up as a description of the culture is really the culture. So to do that, you may want to have a quantitative piece where you have people respond to a questionnaire, and that kind of response is usually a good measure in the sense that there is a level of anonymity to people's responses. But then you could mix it by having, and then the question is, are you going to use the same sample or a different sample? But then you could have a focus group. And out of the focus group, you could come up with some themes. And you could compare the two responses to see to what extent they are a true definition of this culture that you propose that supports and encourages teenage pregnancy. I hope I haven't confused you with that suggestion.
No. I am not that confused at this time.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
But because I think it may work based on the wide scope of the topic that I'm doing.
Yeah.
I think what you just said would work if I use it in those two angles.
Okay. I was just thinking of that as I thought about what you propose to do. Okay, good. So the research designs are the specific procedures involved in the last three steps of the research process: data collection, data analysis, and report writing. Experimental designs. We haven't said much about experiments in this course, but just for information, when you have an experiment, you have an independent variable that is manipulated, and one or more dependent variables are controlled to see the effect of the independent variable on the dependent variable. Right now, I'm supervising a dissertation where the student is looking at the impact of language acquisition, language competence, sorry, and skills learning on the development of student self-esteem. So the two independent variables there are language competence and skills learning, and the dependent variable is self-esteem. But it is possible to reverse those three variables and to have a study where self-esteem is the independent variable and language acquisition, language competence is the dependent variable. So you could propose that when students have good self-esteem, positive self-esteem, they will do well in terms of their language acquisition. You see what I'm saying? So the independent and dependent variables are interchangeable. You make the decision as to what will be the dependent and what will be the independent variable. It's not that a variable is inherently dependent or independent. It's the way you propose to look at the study. Does that make sense to you? But with the experimental design, that's what we're looking at. We're looking at variables and how they're related. Okay. So you manipulate the variables in the experimental design. The correlational design, you're looking for relationship between things, the relationship between the variables. And one of the points that we usually make is that sometimes we have to be careful not to confuse correlation with causation. It may be that two variables are correlated, but it doesn't necessarily mean that one variable causes the other. But there's in experimental design, we have the correlational design. Okay. I'm going to pass that. Survey designs. This involves the administration of an instrument to collect data regarding characteristics of a group. And then there's the grounded design, the theory that is developed inductively from a body of data. It's case-oriented and there is no hypothesis that is tested. Just to back up, in quantitative studies, in addition to the questions of the study, we usually propose a hypothesis. A hypothesis is a statement of the relationship between variables. So going back to the study that I just described, a hypothesis for that study may be that language competence will have a positive effect, or there is a positive relationship between language competence and self-esteem. That's a statement that is a hypothesis. So in the quantitative study, you will now test that hypothesis to see if it is true or if it is not true. You design the study to test the hypothesis. Dr. Payne, would you want to add anything there or just?
I was just thinking, again, I'm always just trying to apply these concepts to different issues. Ryan, it seems to me you have a hypothesis in your what you're looking at. Can you even think about what your tentative hypothesis is in relationship to symbiotic relationships?
I could barely understand you.
Oh, I'm sorry. Can you hear me any better now?
Well, I think your internet keeps either mine or your internet's chopping up. It might be mine.
Could be. Okay, I'm hearing you okay. Now, I was wondering if when we're talking about hypothesis, a hypothesis is something you're kind of supposing or an idea you're testing. If you were to apply that to what you're thinking about in terms of symbiotic relationships and companies, what would be your hypothesis? What would be your idea you're going to test out?
That such a relationship is just as profitable or even more profitable than the traditional relationships.
Okay, right. So that's a hypothesis that you're thinking that companies that involve themselves in a symbiotic relationship with their customers and their employees. Of course, that was the other side. For the employees, that symbiotic relationship could be related to productivity, positive feelings in the workplace, loyalty, trust. So yeah, I'm just trying to think about how to apply, say, a hypothesis, for example, to a particular project. And that's one that just came to my mind. You're sort of testing the idea that a symbiotic relationship will produce some good benefits, both to the customer and the company and the employees.
Correct. I hope.
I have a question.
Go ahead, Maureen. You need to unmute.
Yeah, I was trying to correct today a paper. Dr. Henry, you had, sent the questions you asked. Some of them were easy to take care of. But there's something that I wrote about the research, and you said that the theoretical concept should emerge from the literature. And so on. But something that I had written there about the hypothesis, so I'll have to go back and look at it. But that was therefore supposing that I was going to be doing a quantitative study. But in my head, in my mind, somehow I felt like my study, whatever I'm doing, is supposed to be of a qualitative nature.
Okay.
Having heard this presentation, I'm kind of all over the place again.
We confused you.
Well, Noel just wrote me that prayer changes things. Noel, had I not known of prayer, I'd be out of this course a long time. But I mean, it's just that the challenges when you have to face them. I mean, every day I think of it, So I am here trying to like when you're tossing two balls and sending them around. You're supposed to be doing, is it qualitative, is it quantitative? How will you approach it? Will you have a mixed method? Because we had read this before in the those various chapters that Dr. Payne gives us to read. I mean, I read them, but guess what? Them don't mean nothing to me. Well, they don't mean a lot.
Okay, I heard the Jamaican. Yes. Okay.
Listening to you present this nonsense. So where does that leave me? For me, this presentation is causing me now to feel like another 10 steps again. Not forward.
Okay. Sorry, let me reassure you, Maureen, that nothing is wrong with you. You're having a normal response.
Nothing is wrong with me.
Yes. So I would suggest two things. One, you could make the decision as to whether or not you're going to do qualitative, quantitative, or mixed method. However, having made that decision, you need to find literature to support the decision that you make. So, and I want to suggest that the research on women as entrepreneurs, you're likely to see research in that reflects all three of these methods: quantitative, qualitative, and mixed method.
Yeah, because when you look at the reports that are done like by the international bodies, I downloaded one last night. As a matter of fact, I sent it to a place where they can just copy it for me in color. It's a book with 2 pages. It's a 2017 report by IABB, and so on. So I thought I would just print that and get it published.
Yes.
So, I mean, a lot of stuff that I'm looking at, you see, a lot of qualitative things, but then most times when you look at the literature reviews, they tend to have qualitative and quantitative information, you know, so, you know, I mean, a little of both, I suppose, is not a bad thing, but the part that I'm concerned about, I'm not frightened by quantitative stuff. My background is accounting. Numbers don't frighten me. But it's the thing about a hypothesis and those kind of things. I'm wondering, you know, am I supposed to do that? Do I have to develop something and then test it?
Well, your supervisor will work with you on that. Yes. If you are going to do a quantitative study, yes, you're going to have to propose hypotheses and tests. That's basic if you're going to do a quantitative study. But that is not difficult to do. You would have to identify the variables of your study. What are the key variables? And having identified the variables, you'd have to decide what is the independent and what is the dependent variable. And basically in any study, you have to have at least 2 variables. You could have more than 2 variables in a quantitative study, but you definitely have to have at least 2 variables, 1 independent, 1 dependent. That's just basic, right? So the number of variables is up to you, again, grounded in the research literature that you have reviewed. Now, if you choose to go the qualitative route, then you don't have to start with variables, but having collected the data, when you come to the end of the qualitative study, you need to be able to identify what are the variables that emerge from the study. What are the key variables that emerge from the study? The key variables that helps to explain to you the issue of women as entrepreneurs or women not wanting to become entrepreneurs. Does that make sense to you?
Sort of.
Sort of. Okay, well, thank you for sort of.
let me ask another question here. This is Bill. I'm wrestling a little bit on this issue. Say Maureen, if Maureen wanted to know, there was one statement I remember you made, Maureen, something to the effect that you thought Jamaican women possibly...
Dr. Payne, you're very muffled.
Yeah, his internet
My internet
is not steady.
Okay.
Your internet is not steady.
You probably need to type what you're saying.
Okay.
Try it again.
Are you hearing me yet at this point? Am I clear?
Yes.
Okay, let me try one more time. If a hypothesis always needs to be stated at a quantitative research, if Maureen, okay, this could be a hypothesis. Jamaican women have a negative viewpoint on making money. I think you said something to that effect, okay? That would be a hypothesis you could test, okay? But say you just wanted to know what is the cultural viewpoint of women, the Jamaican women, in regards to entrepreneurialism. You could still test that, but you haven't actually, I see it says I have an unstable internet. You could test it, just say you don't really know, you just want to see what the Jamaican cultural perception is among women. You're not really forming a hypothesis, but you're simply wanting to know the answer to that question.
Can I respond a little to what you're saying?
Go ahead.
Remember that my study is not about Jamaican women, it's about Christian women. I mean, it's Christian women in Jamaica, because the truth is there is a lot of entrepreneurial activity in Jamaica where women is concerned. My concern is Christian women.
Okay,
Understand?
that's fine. Yes.
But that really is what is of issue, because remember, it's a space that I have worked in and I have a level of familiarity. My concern, and I think it is a real concern, is that I don't believe, so maybe the research will prove me wrong, but I don't think that a lot of Christian women are involved in entrepreneurial activity, or enough Christian women. I have a lot of women, but they're not necessarily.
Okay. In that case, you do have an hypothesis. Your hypothesis is Christian Jamaican women are generally not involved in entrepreneurialism. So that's the hypothesis you're testing from. That would be a quantitative approach. What I was asking, if we always have to form on hypothesis, if you didn't actually have that opinion, if you just wanted to find out what do Jamaican Christian women think about entrepreneurialism, you've not actually established a hypothesis, you're simply asking a question. So I was trying to get some clarity on that from a quantitative point of view. And if you have any thoughts on that, Dr. Henry.
Yes, I do. Okay. Here's what happens. When we think of doing research, we come to it with some assumptions.
Yeah.
We come to it with assumptions, and usually those assumptions are rooted in the relationship between variables. Now, a hypothesis is an assumption that you're going to test, because the hypothesis is a formal statement of the assumption of the study. And the assumption is that which you're going to test by collecting data in a quantitative study. So, but any research that we come to it with assumptions. And what is required of us is that we are transparent about the assumptions that we bring to the study. Now, in the quantitative study, you have to be able to test your assumptions, and that's what we call the hypothesis. So you have to state the assumptions in a way that they could be tested. In a qualitative study, you are coming with assumptions, but you are, because you are depending on the respondents to give you the information that you need, you come to it open, so that you would have your assumptions, but then at the end of the day, when you collect the data, you're going to have to see what assumptions the respondents seem to propose. And as a result of that, at the end of the study, you may propose that, having done this qualitative study and having gathered this data, you are proposing, we usually ask you to propose further research. You may propose that, using the results of the study, here are some hypotheses that we think we need to test as we go forward based on the results of this study. Does that make sense?
Right.
Okay.
What we're saying, though, in a quantitative, just the very nature of the term quantitative,
yes,
research means there is going to be a hypothesis that we're testing.
Yes, definitely. Definitely.
Okay.
Definitely. Okay. Then there's the study that is called the ethnographic design. This is the study and systematic recording of human cultures. It is a descriptive work produced from research such as you do field work, observation, interviews, questionnaires, and you put the responses together to give a description. This kind of study is often related to what is called social constructivism. How do people make sense of their world? Or how do they accomplish things through their practice? Okay. Okay, that's it. So we've done a brief overview of qualitative and quantitative research to help you to understand what direction you may take in your own research. Questions, comments as you go forward?
And this is Noel at this end. I think that this presentation tonight has been a little bit more enlightening in terms of it helped you to understand a little clearer some of the things that you would have read from
Okay.
different authors. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
And so I think now we will have to work along with whoever is our supervisors in pulling it together as we write how we're thinking. And they would be able to kind of give us a guide. I mean, they can't help us unless we put it on paper.
Sure.
So I'm thinking that we will have to start doing that that type of writing so that somebody can say, well, you've gone too far, or you need to whatever in order to be on track.
Yeah.
So I think, yes, I think it has given a bit more clarity.
Okay. Okay. Good.
That brings up one other thought that I think Dr. Henry and I were talking before the session, is that when you are involved in this course, a lot of the learning, we're thinking, takes place as you try out some writing, right? Whether you're doing a literature review, you're writing a problem statement. We're thinking the best way to learn is to try it out. So you write out a paragraph, a few paragraphs. Someone like Dr. Henry or myself, we give you feedback, then you do some revision. Sometimes you can come at that process thinking, oh my gosh, my product is just not good. You know, I've not done a good job, because we are so accustomed to having our work evaluated. But you know, in this kind of a course, you've got to remember that the very writing of paragraphs as you're working at this proposal and us giving you feedback, and then you do some rewriting revision, that is the learning. Like you've just said, Noel, you can read these things in books, but the concepts sometimes just don't really materialize in our mind clearly.
Yeah.
We tend to, they're just thought concepts. It's when you start trying to apply them, writing it, and then like one of us can give you some feedback. I think that's really the best way to learn.
Yes, definitely. It's learning by doing. You may hear lectures on how to do research, but you don't know how to do it until you do it.
Yeah.
That is it. The challenge is in your doing it. Yes.
Yeah. Right.
I have a question about the doing. One of the things that I have found that every time I think that this is an article I would prefer to read or want to read, or it turns out we have to pay for it.
Oh yes, some of those things.
Yes.
So, like I find that more than 70% of the articles that having read the abstract.
Okay, before you do that, Maureen, could you check with the library? And
I did it through ProQuest, which is through BGU. I've been doing it through BGU's ProQuest. So I wrote to our librarian today.
Okay, please speak with the librarian to see, how she could help you with that. Yes, yes, that can be a challenge, and yes.
So Noel, that's one of the frustrations that I experience. Really often.
Okay.
I have the same challenge. A good piece of work, and then they see $42 and
Oh
20,
no.
whatever.
No, we
Yeah.
I have not paid for any.
Okay.
No.
No.
I'm not paying just yet because I can't just pay for something $42 just to scan a document.
And
Yes.
then you don't use
You know
it.
what that is in Jamaican dollars?
Yes.
Yes.
No way.
Yes. We understand. Yes. So we're going to have to work with Jennifer on this. Okay. That's important.
I
Right.
sent her a message.
Good. But when you send her something, copy in Dr. Payne on it.
Okay.
Right.
Yes, do copy Dr. Payne.
Yeah,
Whenever
I
you,
can forward this particular
yes, copy Dr. Payne on your correspondence.
because I've had
So that,
times,
you know.
I've had times when I couldn't access something, and Jennifer, our librarian, has somehow magically provided access. And so
Yes,
she knows,
Well,
she knows
you know,
subscription. Yeah.
the reason why I decided to ask her was that I was trying to subscribe to one particular one last night, and they asked me for an email, and if I had an email from the college,
Mm-hmm.
I would have gotten access. So that it was
Yes.
at that point that I said, oh,
Right.
I knew what I should write to her. So I wrote to her, but I didn't write her telling her that part of the detail. But I figured if I told her what my issue was, she would have had the answers, and you're now confirmed.
Maureen, don't you have a college email?
I don't know.
Yes, you should. And what you should be doing is using your college email when you correspond with these art libraries.
I didn't.
That's what you need to do.
I put up my hands. I'm guilty. I'm not.
You have to use the college email.
No.
Yes, definitely. You have to. And that goes for all of us.
That's part of the orientation that I think I probably just didn't really get. I don't know. Yeah, you have to understand how it is when those of us who, doing an online degree, this was my first time doing this. I've done other things online, but just for a day, but not a whole course, right? So this really was that experience for me. My other 2 degrees I did face-to-face.
Okay.
In a class, so
yes,
a lot of learning, although I'm at this stage, which is why. Anyway.
Okay, good. Well, I'm glad you raised that so that we could clarify it with and for you. But going forward, use your BGU email, and also when you search, use the BGU library.
I always do.
You
that.
always do.
I can use Google Scholar outside of that, but since I started this course,
yes,
I have used the BGU online.
And you can also use Google Scholar.
Yes, I'm just saying that I have gone through them more than any other.
Okay.
Since I've been doing RES 72.
Yes, okay.
I actually never used the library before for none of the other courses I did.
Okay. That is a confession you don't want to speak publicly. Okay.
Well, I've made it.
Yes, you have.
Natalia already told me. She said that she said that, what was the word she used? Like, she didn't say worst enemy, but you know how you'd say you are my worst enemy.
Yes.
So she said that I was the librarian's nightmare. So based on that, I decided I did not want to be the librarian's nightmare. I started using it.
Okay, Maureen.
But this course forces you to use the library anyway, because
you have to.
The books we have don't give us content for the research, So
yes. When you're doing research, your basic go-to material is the peer-reviewed journals.
Yeah.
The articles in the peer-reviewed journals.
Well, we had been introduced to those by Dr. Rogers
Mm-hmm.
and so on. So, you know, over
That's
to
your basic standard
a
go-to
lot of time
material.
to do that.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Okay. Okay, Dr. Payne.
Okay. We won't be having a Zoom room next week. We won't actually be having discussions next week. What we want to do is give you time to be looking at your proposal, looking at all the different sections, writing them out,
Mm-hmm.
submit them online. We will give you input. If we actually, we'll probably tell you maybe rewrite this way. We might give you some suggestions. But we want you to just keep focusing on, we don't want you to have to answer questions in discussion or the Zoom room. We want you just to focus on doing the writing in that final project proposal. Submitting it, even if you have to submit it a few times, that's fine. We're not going to issue a grade until we've gone through that process a few times, just so you know that. So this week, I think you're going to work on the first couple of sections of the research methodology, trying to select your research methodology, whether it's quantitative, qualitative, or a mixed method, explaining why you think any of those methods are going to be the most helpful for you to answer your particular research questions. And, you know, that always, we've been trying to say that in this session, is that the methodology you use, quantitative, qualitative, mixed, depends on what seems to be the best approach for answering a particular question. Like I said, if you're asking a question, say we just talked about some different questions, okay? You know, Christian Jamaican women you're thinking that possibly they're not as open to entrepreneurial, you know, work. That you could design some kind of a survey that you put out there. That would be a quantitative survey to test that hypothesis. But then, as you maybe want to talk to some women who actually have started entrepreneurial works, you may want to sit down with them individually and talk to them and see what kinds of themes come forth. That was really, you know, what was helpful to them as they started working on their entrepreneurial endeavors. You could take a qualitative approach if that's the kind of question you're trying to answer. So when you're thinking about that research method in this chapter 3, think about how the different methodological approaches can be used to approach the questions that you need to answer. Okay? And the other section I want you to work on is the sampling section. We've said in the presentation today, for a quantitative approach, the size of the sample is very important because it needs to be representative of, say, a particular population. And I'm giving you, there's a website I put on the instruction sheet for week 8 that you can go to, and it'll say, if you have a population of 1 million and you want to have a confidence factor of, say, 95%, or you want a margin of error of plus or minus 3, it will show you what size sample you would need, okay? Now, that's if you're going to do a purely quantitative study, okay? You may not necessarily do, that level of a sample, but you may ask some quantitative questions, okay, in a study, in whatever you're doing, even though you're maybe not doing a full quantitative study where you have to have a large representative sample. So, think about that. And then for the final week, you'd go ahead and work out the other part of the research chapter. Then you've got, I think, 2 weeks after you finish the online sessions, you've got 2 weeks to turn in a final project proposal draft. And I always call it a draft because you're going to eventually go through that draft with your supervisor to probably, make some refinements. The supervisor may have some recommendation, etc. So that's the process over the next month. So over the next 2 weeks, you're going to be working on that research methodology chapter this week and next week. And then 2 weeks after that, you'll be trying to put this all together into this final project proposal, and we'll keep giving you feedback along the way as you submit those online. Okay. All right. Well, I've got a little past 10 minutes to the hour, so I think we'll go ahead and close down. This session has been recorded. If you'd like to go back and listen to it and watch some of the slides, sometimes you need to hear these things, several times before they finally start to make sense. And I understand that, absolutely. So with that, I think I'm going to go ahead and close down the session, and we will be communicating with you online and in the sessions. Work on the discussion question this week, and we will try to give you feedback.
Okay.